The crowd surged like carrion birds, hungry and shrill, drawn not by blood, but by something far more unsettling: commerce and flesh. In the heart of the town square, atop a weather-worn platform soaked with the ghosts of traded lives, sat a small, pitiful basket. Wrapped in filthy rags not fit to line a kennel, a black infant squirmed, barely 6 months old. His cries pierced the thick, soupy air of morning like knives through silk. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip. "What am I bid for this? Fine little specimen, strong lineage. He'll be worth double in 10 years. $20 do I hear more?" He barked. Hands flew up like weeds choking a field. Shouts clashed, loud and frenzied, as filthy men competed to buy the child like one might bid for a young ox. His skin, rich and dark, glistened beneath the rising sun, while his tiny fists thrashed helplessly, lost in fear and noise. Some women averted their eyes, ashamed or simply shattered by helplessness, but the bidding didn't stop. At the edge of the commotion, a figure stood apart, rigid, silent, and known to all: Silas Garrett. 45, tall, weathered, carved from drought and tragedy. He'd built his ranching empire with hands that knew both creation and destruction. Since the fever took his wife and daughter 5 years ago, he hadn't allowed another soul within reach. When the auctioneer's gaze settled on him, a hush settled over the square. "Mr. Garrett," he called, voice thick with expectation, "you always know a good investment when you see one. 35 is the going offer." The crowd turned as one. Silas Garrett had deep pockets and a reputation for taking only the best stock. If anyone was going to end this auction, it would be him. That's what they believed. That's what they'd always believed. Silas didn't move for a long moment. His stare bore into the child. Something flickered in his eyes: old pain, buried and bitter, flashing like a knife's glint, too fast for most to notice, but enough to chill the air. "No," he said finally. His voice was dry, flat, the voice of a man who'd buried too much. A collective gasp rippled through the square. The auctioneer faltered, hammer raised in a trembling hand. "But sir, you must see," I said. No. Without another word, Silas turned his horse and rode out of the square, his boots throwing up dust and disbelief. Whispers chased him, soft, cutting. Some said he'd gone weak. Others that grief had finally cracked his mind open like a dry seed pod. Only one person didn't whisper. A woman in a faded blue dress watched him ride away, Dina Ross. Her eyes didn't show surprise, only resolve. She'd been waiting for that moment longer than anyone knew. The baby cried again, louder this time, as if sensing the weight of a future he didn't yet understand. Silas didn't look back. He didn't see the shift he'd triggered. But by the time dawn spilled over the land again, 50 riders would gather at his ranch, and the walls around his grief would tremble under pressure they'd never known before. He rode hard toward home, wind slapping his face, silence clinging to him heavier than armor. Behind him, the town's muttering tangled with his thoughts, but one sound drowned out the rest: the child's cry. That fragile, desperate sound had carved open old scars, made him remember a smaller voice, a voice that once called him Pa. His ranch came into view, vast, hollow, heartbreak stitched into every post and fence line. The cattle grazed undisturbed, and the main house stood empty as a church abandoned mid-sermon. No laughter echoed from its halls, no footsteps danced across its wooden floors. It was a tomb for the life he once lived. But something wasn't right. Fresh hoofprints scarred the ground, many of them dozens. Patterns circled the property like ghosts mapping a siege. Silas dismounted slowly, unease tightening in his gut. He gripped his rifle and followed the signs. The prints weren't random. They were deliberate, placed at vantage points, watching, calculating. Whoever had been here knew his land as well as he did. As twilight bled across the hills, he caught motion, just a flicker between the trees. A rider, then another, and another, calm, visible, unafraid. His hand closed tighter around the rifle. No one had dared step foot on his land in years. His name alone was enough to keep wanderers wide of his fences. But these riders didn't hesitate. They moved with the steady rhythm of people who had nothing left to lose. From the trees emerged a familiar figure, Dina Ross. Her blue dress was now nearly gray from travel and time, but she wore it like a flag. She stopped just beyond his range. Her voice cut the silence cleanly. "Silas Garrett, we need to talk." "Get off my land," he barked, raising the rifle. "I don't care what you're selling or preaching right on." She didn't so much as blink. "You wanted the same thing we did today. That baby didn't deserve to be bought. Neither do we." The words struck deep. He wavered. "Just for a heartbeat. You think you know me," he growled. "I know enough," she said. "You looked at that child and saw something the rest of them couldn't. You saw a soul. That means something." From the dark trees, more riders stepped into view. 10, then 20, then 30 more. Black men and women, quiet, armed, and alert. Their eyes locked onto his, not with fear, but with cautious hope, with a hunger for justice. "Not vengeance. We ride at dawn," Dina said. "You can ride with us or stand in our way. But this ends with that baby free, and the chains broken, one way or another." Then they were gone, fading into the dusk like a mirage swallowed by shadow. Silence returned, but it wasn't peace. It was a storm on the horizon. Silas couldn't rest. He roamed the empty halls of his home, checking and rechecking every weapon, every locked door, every inch of ground. But no threat outside could match the war raging inside his chest. He couldn't stop hearing the baby's cries, couldn't stop remembering his own child's final breaths. The fever, the shaking, the way she'd clung to his finger, her tiny body burning up in his arms. He'd promised himself never again. No more love, no more loss, just work and solitude. But now, just before first light, Silas climbed to the roof. He needed to see the day break, needed to know what was coming, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Riders everywhere, pouring over the hills, sliding through the trees, rising from the valley like a tide of reckoning, 50 strong, at least, their faces set, their spines straight. They rode like people who had already lost the world once and weren't about to let it happen again. But they weren't coming to take. They were coming to stand, to reclaim, to remind one grieving man that the past didn't have to be a prison. And as the sun stretched its first fingers across the plains, Silas Garrett understood the truth. This wasn't just about a baby. It was about redemption. It was about resistance. It was about reclaiming the soul of a land that had forgotten what it meant to be just. And he, scarred, silent, and stubborn, would have to choose which side of the sunrise he belonged to. Precision led them through the dry morning air towards Silas Garrett's ranch. At the front rode Dina Ross, not a solitary figure anymore, but the determined leader of what could have been mistaken for a small army. And yet, this was no invasion. As they approached, Silas noticed the absence of rifles, the lack of drawn blades. In their place were shovels, hammers, rope, and packs of supplies, whatever they intended. It wasn't violence. The riders halted in a wide arc, forming a semicircle, around his house, close enough to speak, far enough to show restraint. From his perch on the roof, Silas kept his rifle lowered, but ready. Dina dismounted, her palms lifted and empty, and stepped forward alone. "Mr. Garrett," she called, voice clear and firm, "we're not here for blood. We're here to give you something you haven't had in 5 years." His stance didn't change, but the rifle barrel dipped slightly. "And what would that be?" "A chance," she replied, her voice slicing through the silence. "To save a life, instead of watching one vanish." The words struck deep. Silas scanned their faces, weathered, scarred, marked by grief too old to fade. Mothers with hollow eyes who had buried children. Men bent not by age, but by years of cruelty. These people didn't just know sorrow, they lived with it, carried it like a second skin. "That baby at the auction," Dina said, her voice steady though fire burned beneath it, "was bought by Marcus Webb." Silas's jaw locked tight. Webb, a name blackened with cruelty. A man known for grinding children into the dirt of his fields until they collapsed from exhaustion. "That infant won't live to see his second birthday," Dina continued. "Not unless we act." A familiar pain rippled through Silas's chest. Webb was everything he loathed, an empire built on suffering. A man who could assign a dollar value to agony by noon. Dina declared, "We ride to his ranch and take that child back. We want you with us. Not for your gun, not for your land. Because that baby needs someone who understands what it means to fight for family." The sun was climbing, burning away shadows as it did the last 5 years of avoidance. Silas stood on a line he'd drawn around his life and dared not cross since the day it all fell apart. He stepped down from the roof. His boots struck the ground with a weight that echoed something inside him. The semicircle opened, slightly, leaving room for a man who hadn't stood beside anyone in years. "You're talking about robbing Marcus Webb," he said as he walked toward her. "That makes you outlaws. That makes me want to if I join you." Dina gave a small, tired smile. "We call ourselves liberators, and you've already crossed the line, Mr. Garrett. When you didn't raise your hand at that auction, you chose to break from a system that sells babies like cattle." He glanced once more at the group around him, weathered hands, furrowed brows, the unmistakable dignity of those who had lost everything, but still stood tall. They weren't asking him to commit a crime. They were asking him to be a man again. "Webb has 12 armed guards on his property," Silas said grimly. "You're setting the stage for a massacre." "Maybe," Dina replied without blinking. "But that baby is dying by inches. Sometimes a quick death is a mercy compared to the slow one he's already suffering." The blow landed. It was the same pain that had gutted him years ago, cradling his daughter's fevered body, whispering promises he was powerless to keep, begging a silent sky for mercy that never came. "There might be another way," he said, the words spilling out before he knew they were forming. "Webb's a businessman first. He only understands money. If we hit him where it hurts his supply lines, his contracts, we might force his hand." Dina's eyes sharpened. "Go on." "He relies on my cattle for meat shipments across half the territory. If I pull out, he'll take a hit big enough to notice. If I convince the buyers he's toxic, make it known I won't do business with anyone who deals with him, he might give the baby up to protect his profits." Dina tilted her head. "That's a thin line you're walking. What if he runs or calls in law enforcement?" Silas exhaled slowly. A tremor of something unfamiliar stirred inside him. Not fear. Not exactly. It was thinner, sharper hope. "If I do this," he said, "there's no going back. If it fails, that baby dies. And if it works, then I'll have to start caring again." Dina took another step forward. Her voice softened, but every word carried weight. "We're all scared, Mr. Garrett. Fear is just love with no place to go. That baby needs someone who'll fight for him like you wish someone had fought for your daughter." He turned back for a moment, looking at the house behind him, lifeless, silent, and full of ghosts. Then he looked ahead at the people who stood ready to risk everything. He could feel the shape of the decision settling over him. "I'll ride with you," he said at last, voice tight, heavy with memory. "But we do this smart. No blood unless he draws it. We speak first." The change in Dina's expression was instant. Relief, fierce and luminous, broke through the steel in her face. These people had been willing to die to save a child. Now, they had someone who knew how to do it without dying. They mounted quickly, the horses taking off in a determined rhythm. Silas rode beside Dina, the wind lashing across his chest like a dare. And for the first time in 5 long years, he felt something deeper than grief. He felt purpose. As they rode, he glanced sideways. "How did you know about my daughter?" "The way you looked at that baby," Dina said quietly. "It's the same way I looked at my boy before they sold him south, 15 years ago. Some things only broken parents can see." He didn't respond. The silence between them had a language of its own. They crested the final rise, and Webb's ranch stretched out below like a fortress, all watchtowers, armed patrols, a perimeter built to intimidate. "God in heaven," someone whispered. "How are we getting through that?" But Silas was already studying it, eyes narrowing. The defenses were strong, but only against a direct charge. "Dina," he said, "take half the riders around to the north pasture. Let him see you. Let him think you're there to scatter his herds. And the rest, stay with me." We walked straight up to the front door. There were murmurs, doubt, disbelief. Was he serious, insane? "Webb knows me," Silas said simply. "He'll open the door, especially if he thinks he's about to lose money, while I'm inside. I'll find that baby, see if there's a way to walk out without a fight. And if he puts a bullet in you the moment you step inside," Dina asked, "then you'll know talking's done." He replied, stone-faced, the group began to split, following their roles, and as the burden of leadership fell on Silas again, something surprising happened. It didn't crush him. This time, it felt right, because this time, he wasn't carrying it alone. 50 souls were counting on him to do what he couldn't, what he didn't, 5 long years ago, save a child who had no one else. As the sun carved its way across the peak of the sky, Silas Garrett rode with measured resolve toward the wrought iron gates of Marcus Webb's estate. The memories clung to his back like a second skin: regret, guilt, and the ache of a failure that had never stopped bleeding. In the next hour, he would either reclaim his honor or be crushed beneath its weight. The guards posted at the gate stiffened when they saw him. Recognition flickered in their eyes. The name still meant something. Silas Garrett, the man who had turned parched soil into thriving pastureland, who had carved a kingdom out of thorns and drought. That name still opened doors that should have remained sealed. In less than a minute, he was riding through the courtyard, gravel crunching under his boots as he dismounted. His hands stayed in plain sight, while his eyes scanned each corner, each shadow, anywhere a rifle barrel might hide. The house's double doors opened, and from them emerged Marcus Webb with his trademark grace, the gliding ease of a predator. In his own lair, lanky, elegant, and cold as a January pond, Webb's gaze was like a mirror of ice. His smile as hollow as a gutted deer. Every stitch of his fine clothes whispered wealth, but his soul was threadbare, moth-eaten with rot. He stepped forward, angling himself between Silas and the entrance, making it clear no one crossed that threshold without his leave. "Silas Garrett," he said smoothly, extending a hand like a spider offering silk. Silas accepted it with the reluctance of a man touching something venomous. "Didn't expect to see you on my land." "What brings you here?" "Business," Silas said, tone flat as a desert plain. "Only business." Webb's lips curled in amusement, but it was the smile of a wolf sniffing blood. "Ah, the infant. Fine investment. 10 years from now, I'll have a laborer worth 10 times what he cost me. Assuming he lives that long." The callousness of the remark ignited a slow fury in Silas's gut, but he gave no sign. His jaw tightened just enough to crack a molar. "That's actually why I came. I've got an offer you'll want to hear." Webb raised an eyebrow. "Then let's hear it somewhere more comfortable." He stepped aside, and together they moved. Inside, the door groaned shut behind them like the lid on a coffin. From somewhere deep within the house came the muffled, urgent cry of a baby, soft but unmistakable. Silas's pulse jumped. Still alive. That meant hope still had breath. Webb led him into a study that reeked of dominance. Mahogany shelves sagged with books and ledgers, contracts and sale logs, the kind of records that turned human lives into ink in profit. A glass of whiskey rested on the desk, sweating beside a fresh pile of sale slips. One of them bore yesterday's date. Webb lowered himself into a leather chair, fingers steepled. "Let's not waste time. What's this proposition?" "I need hands," Silas began, voice composed. "Young ones, easier to train. Spring cattle drive's coming, and I want fresh stock. I'll pay double the going rate for every able body. And the baby, I'll take him too. I'll pay you threefold what you spent, and for the next 5 years, you get first pick of my cattle, below market." It was too generous. Webb knew it, and Silas knew Webb knew. Suspicion sparked in the man's sharp eyes. He leaned back, studying Silas like a viper sizing prey. "Why that child?" he asked quietly. "You could take your pick from a dozen others." Silas didn't hesitate. "Young ones are blank slates, no bad habits. Heard that boy's strong." Despite the conditions, right on cue, the child's cries grew louder, more frantic. Footsteps creaked above them. Servants, guards, ghosts going about their day while one helpless soul cried out for rescue. Webb rose slowly and wandered to the window. His gaze swept over his estate, men with rifles, patrols on horseback, control in every direction. "Strange thing," he said without turning. "Been hearing rumors about you lately. That auction last week. Folks riding near your property." Silas's spine went rigid, but his voice stayed calm. "I raise cattle. That's all I do." Webb finally turned, and whatever friendliness he had worn peeled away. His eyes burned now with open hostility. "Is that so? Because from where?" I sit. It looks like you're running some kind of backdoor rescue route. Like you're trying to dismantle what I built. Then it came. The one sound Silas had feared more than any other. Silence. The baby's cries stopped. Not faded, stopped. The hush that followed was sharp and hollow, like a grave waiting to be filled. Webb's voice dropped to a whisper that cut. Like a razor. Here's what I'll give you. Leave now, and I don't put a bullet in your back. Come back again, and I'll make sure that child dies slow, and you'll be there to see it. Silas didn't move. Every nerve in his body screamed that this was a trap, that Webb had known from the start why he was here, and had laid the snare with care and cruelty. But Silas had survived fire, frost, and loss. He wasn't about to fold for a man like this. Webb was waiting for fear, for weakness, for the familiar buckle in a man's spine. But Silas didn't flinch. "You're not wrong, Marcus," he said, taking a slow step toward the desk. "I am dangerous to men like you, just not in the way you think." Webb's fingers twitched, drifting toward the pistol holstered on his hip. Silas didn't blink. His voice stayed level. "You built your empire on fear, isolation. You made sure nobody had anyone to turn to. Kept them frightened, alone. That's how you controlled them. But what happens when they're not alone anymore?" A sound rose from outside. Voices, then more shouts, urgency, commotion. Webb spun around to look out the window, and he saw it. They were coming, riders, dozens of them, moving without secrecy now. No more hiding in shadows. Dina was at the front, and they weren't alone. Appearing like a storm on every horizon, they came, riders and wagons surging forward from every corner of the land, converging with quiet fury upon Webb's stronghold. Webb staggered back, stunned. "What the hell is this?" Silas didn't flinch. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of something final. "Word moves fast out here. 50 souls showed up at my ranch this morning, but they didn't ride straight here. No, they stopped at every homestead, every forgotten trail shack, every little patch of earth where folks still believe in right and wrong. You've wronged more people than you ever counted, Webb, and they've all decided they've had enough." From deeper inside the house, the sharp cry of a baby cut through the air, louder now, frantic. Doors creaked, boots thudded, and voices rose in panic behind thick walls. Webb's little kingdom was shaking, not from bullets or fire, but from the sheer will of those he'd trampled for too long. "This is mutiny," he spat, drawing a pistol from his coat. "I'll string up every last one of you." "Maybe you will," Silas said, his gaze steady, "but you'll have to crawl over the bones of better men to do it." The front door slammed open with a crash that echoed like thunder. Dina Ross stormed in, flanked by 3 determined riders. Her eyes burned, and she didn't slow or ask permission. She walked straight through Webb's grand halls as if she owned them. "Where's the child?" she demanded. Webb raised his pistol, hand trembling, but he never had the chance to fire. Silas moved fast, a blur of raw instinct and years of hard labor. He slammed into Webb, sending them both crashing against the desk. Glass shattered, papers scattered. The gun flew from Webb's hand and skidded across the floor from upstairs. A voice rang out. "Second door on the left." Dina didn't hesitate. She raced up the stairs, her boots pounding wood as she took them 3 at a time. Downstairs, Silas pinned Webb to the floor, both men gasping for breath through the shattered window. He saw the last of Webb's guards, once loyal, now surrendering their arms to the people outside. Not a single shot had been fired, yet the fortress had crumbled. Moments later, Dina descended, cradling a frail bundle. The baby's limbs were thin, too light for comfort, but his eyes were alert, bright, and unafraid. "He's alive," she whispered, her tears falling silently. Silas stood, blood on his shirt and dust in his lungs. "It ends here," he said, his voice rough. "This game you've played with people's lives, it's finished." Webb gave a broken laugh, bitter and sharp. "You think this changes anything? You think saving one filthy brat makes you some kind of savior? There are 100 more like me out there. You've just declared war on all of them." Silas stared down at the man, bruised and bloodied, but still leaking venom. Something shifted in him, then a weight he'd carried for years lifted. Not the cold peace of isolation, but something deeper, fuller. "You're not wrong," he said. There are 100 more like you. But today, there were 50 of us who said no. Tomorrow, it'll be 200. A week from now, 1,000. Outside, the crowd was no longer scattered individuals. They had become a single body, united in purpose. Black freedmen stood shoulder to shoulder with white farmers. Mexican vaqueros rode beside native warriors. Whatever lines the world had drawn between them, they were being erased, step by step. By the act of standing together, Dina looked down at the child, holding him close. Does he have a name? Webb spat again, blood thick on his lip. He's property. Property don't get names. Silas shook his head, his voice firm. Then we'll give him one. He knelt, looking into the child's eyes that glinted with life, with something unbroken. He thought of another child, one long lost to time and regret. Samuel, he said. His name is Samuel. The baby let out a tiny sound, a gurgle, a laugh, something joyful. In Dina's arms, he no longer looked like a rescued object. He looked like the beginning of something new. As they rode away from the estate, Silas glanced back once. Webb's empire, built on pain and silence, lay behind them like a corpse. What they carried forward was something else entirely. He looked at the people riding beside him. They had arrived as strangers. Now they moved as one. Dina rode close, Samuel safe in her arms. He'll need a family, she said. Someone who'll fight for him, love him. Silas looked ahead, to the winding road that led to his ranch once. Quiet, once lonely, now alive with the sound of voices and hoof beats and laughter. He turned to her. Maybe he doesn't need just one family, he said. Maybe he needs all of us. And so Samuel became more than a rescued child. He became the firstborn of a new tribe. Not bound by blood, but by choice, a people who had decided to build something different, something decent. Dina moved into Silas's home, and others followed. They came one by one, drawn by the promise of belonging. The ranch that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with life. It became a refuge, a sanctuary, a living rebellion against the cruelty that had reigned too long. Webb had been right about one thing. They had declared war, but not with rifles or fire. Their weapons were unity, kindness, and the unshakable belief that dignity belonged to everyone. Years passed. Samuel grew strong, his laughter filling the same yard where sorrow once settled. When he was old enough, Silas sat him down and told him the truth. He told him about the day 50 people arrived at his gate, about the empire they faced, about the fight that changed everything. And he told him something else, that real family isn't always about who you're born to, but about who chooses to stand beside you when it matters most. In that yard where silence once lived, Samuel ran wild and free, a child born from defiance, raised by many, loved without condition. Because on that day, one man found his calling, a shattered land found its strength, and a nameless child found something worth more than freedom. He found home.